Hey there, Rish. Hope you're having a great day today. Here's your video lesson. Let's see here. One huge topic I want to talk about. I'll talk about said topic and then I'll kind of go over what to do with it and how it applies to what you're trying to learn. So let's get to it. So where we left off last time, we got some sequences happening, right? We talked about intervals and how you can use sequences to create numerical patterns inside your riffs, and then intervals in order to get it kind of sounding like less scaly and just linear. And now that you're starting to kind of see that really the secret of writing riffs is not learning exotic scales like Phrygian dominant or the modes of, the Hirohishi scale or whatever it is. So like that stuff is cool. The tool that I use most often, at least in my writing, in the writings I've looked at, the examples that I've looked at over the years of professional bands, is that it's inside the major scale. I feel like that's like really what they're doing. There's the hunt and peck guys that will kind of stumble upon this and not know what it's called. I think it's a really crazy name, but really at the end of the day, the secret is inside the major scale. Now that's not the whole story because there is way more to it than that. So like on one level, it's like, yeah, it is the major scale, but there's something else in there, and I'll wait till we're in person next time to talk about that. But to kind of get the ball rolling in that direction, what I would put on my short list next of things for you to do to get out of kind of like just like hunting around for stuff is actually look at the riff that you showed me a couple weeks ago, which we kind of found out was actually an arpeggio that you had worked out. It speaks well to your ear, right? That you heard that. So let's put a name on it and call it something, and then that way you can reproduce it for other things, or maybe that chord might be part of your signature sound that you'll develop. We don't know yet. We'll find out. But anyway, so when I'm writing a riff, say if I just kind of pull one out of the air, if I'm just do something like, I don't know, right now the most inspiring thing in the world, but it's just kind of me just pulling something out. If I just see if I can make it any better. Might see if I was doing something like kind of like deathcore kind of like grind thing. What I'm doing there, I'm not just randomly throwing my fingers at the fretboard. What I'm doing is I'm outlining arpeggios. Now, which ones are going to be, you're going to find in these styles in progressive music, across, say like Mastodon, which I consider to be like progressive stoner music, or say Animals as Leaders is going to be like that progressive cinematic kind of style. What they're going to be doing is outlining seventh chords. Even stuff like Elder that's what they're doing. That's how they get that ethereal sound. So it's not like if I combine these magic notes, they're gonna do something special, right? You can hedge your bets a little bit by actually knowing the chord tones that you're going to be aiming for, which are your structural points of your riff. So say for in that example right there that I just did this, I forget what I even did. There's probably a good idea in there somewhere, but that's just enough for right now. What I'm doing is I'm using these what are called drop two seventh chords. There's a lot of different kinds of seventh chord voicings that we can have on the guitar, but I found this was like a short list one that I would do. So if I just go clean tone just for a second so you can kind of hear what they sound like. Let's use you. And we'll patiently wait till it loads. So what we talked about before, these are triad chords, right? There are three notes in that chord, right? If I go through this E minor chord, I'm going to find E, G, and B. We discovered that by when we wrote out the major scale and we jumped over certain notes, that produced a triad. Now, I kind of posed the question last time, what happens if you jump over the triad notes, but then you do like one more jump? And then you end up with seventh chords. These are all in the key of C right here. So if you write out your C major scale, these guys right here are what you come up with, right? We can go into the math of it later on if you find that interesting. But really, if I take the scale C major and I put it into harmony, if I make chords out of it, doing that jump and over method I did last time, I end up with these chords. C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, which should look familiar to you. That's what you actually had used. And then I go F major 7, G7, I got A minor 7, I could do it here, I could do it here, obviously, there's a lot of different music played, and then B minor 7 flat 5. Right? Those are my sound colors, right? Start viewing these chord progressions not as like this kind of business. Right, that ain't this kind of music, right? Like that music has a certain place in the world and it has a certain function and is very enjoyable and everything, but that's not what these guys and gals are doing in progressive music. They're building soundscapes, and what you want is you want to create a unified soundscape through like everything that you're writing. So if you say, for example, chose to write a riff around that E minor 7, right? Well, in this style, they're not going to use that blues sounding chord right there, the G7, just because that's more, you find that more in like Grateful Dead music, right? Like that's like used for stuff, right? It's used in jazz and blues, but remember, progressive is borrowing the tool from jazz and blues. They're not like actually trying to sound like that. They're just like in that sound. And as far as the progressive metal and rock and post rock and all that stuff that I've looked at over the years, major 7 and minor 7. Right, those are going to be your go-tos, right? It's good to know that the dominant 7 ones and the minor 7 flat 5 because you want to be well-versed and be able to hold the conversation with somebody, but you don't want to write riffs around that stuff just because that's not what Mastodon's using to write riffs, right? So when you're playing this stuff, you want to focus primarily on these minor 7 shapes and the major 7 shapes, right? And the other thing is, this is very important too, is that when they're writing chord progressions with their riffs, they're not trying to do the Bach thing where it's like, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Like they'll have like 5 or 6 chords in a string. Like, do you see it? Yeah, sometimes you'll see it, especially in like clean sections or ambient sections. Sometimes you might find it there, but typically it's like 1 or 2 chords. And that was something that I actually had to come to terms with, because when I was at fancy music school, it was like, how many chords can you jam into the measure? How many notes can you jam in the measure? And then when I really looked at this music and kind of got in there, it was really like 2 chords, right? Like a band literally might do something like this. Like this actually might be a section where they go. And that might be the chord that might be the 2 chords that they base the whole section off of, or even the whole song. The last one I wrote, like it was like literally like 2 chords. But I got a lot of mileage out of it because I'm building sound worlds. And if you change chords too often, you're going to obscure the world that you're trying to create for your listener, right? So it's not like, hey, look at my cool fancy riff that travels through like 8 different chords, right? Stuff exists, obviously, right? But really, when you're talking modern day Babylon and contortionists and stuff like that, that they're not using plethora of chords. It's like literally like 1 chord. So what I did there in that when I was making my riff was that I was using this chord right here. I think I was using D minor. That's my structural framework, right? Everything I want to do wants to come back to that. So it'd actually be worthwhile to play the chord, and then can you arpeggiate the chord well enough that you don't have to think about where stuff is. Then the fun part is you take, actually I'll do E minor since that's kind of where we were last time, so I'll move it up to E minor, still in the key right over here. So I play, here, right? So for me, I'll take that arpeggio and go, okay, that's my arpeggio, and then I'll learn like all the passing notes that are in it. So say if I take, but if I stick with all those sequences and stuff, it starts obscuring what the fundamental harmony is, right? So I want my riff to be primarily these notes. And then what I'll do is I'll add in passing notes from the scale in there. But I gotta make sure that the opening lick might be this. See if I can make one real quick. Something like that. But what I'm doing there is hey. Then I add 1 note from the scale outside and go up a half step. I might come down the scale, but then land on the root, so the root note becomes the the point that I'm aiming for. So here I go here, that's a chord tone. I go outside, and more about that in several lessons from now. Oh, hey, wait a minute. That's a chord tone too. Hey, wait a second. G major and E minor put together. Well, it's a conversation for another day, or maybe next time you're in here. But really, my riff, if I just do the skeleton of it, I might do bum, be, dum, bum. Okay, there's my framework. Now I can change up the interval pattern, but I'm getting all my cool intervals from the chord, right? I'm not trying to invent stuff, right? I'm not trying to like be like, oh, I'm gonna be super creative and like think outside the box. If I do that, I'm gonna start doing something, right? When I'm doing this is literally what they're doing. They're following the chord tones. So that's my structural points. Maybe I'll do something with that later. I have a whole like riff graveyard. Like, well, that's a cool idea. I should do something with that. And then it goes into a hard drive, and then like maybe like 2 years later, I'll go, oh, I remember that cool idea that I had one time. Anyway, but you see that it's not magic, right? You just know your chord tones over here, right? You know where the seventh is. You treat the chords as your intervallic playground. So I'm not trying just to jump around and hope something comes out of my guitar. I literally know the notes that are cool, right? If I do be-dum, boom, 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 be-da-dum, boom. Right, let's skip around in there until I find something I like, right? But I know I'm onto something because it's not like, whoa, what is that, right? It's just me hunting for stuff. This reduces all the hunting, and I can get a faster workflow, and I can get through songs faster. And more about that, because it's one thing to come up with a riff and come up with a drum line that goes underneath it, or a synth that goes on top of it. It's another to take that riff and use it to generate other ideas. So instead of you just having like a bunch of collections of like 30, 45-second riff loops, you actually have a coherent idea that like develops over time. And that's really cool with this stuff, is that there are the Instagram riff guys that like will play like one riff and then just have a loop going. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, they're great. It's like acrobatic. It's like the Guitar Olympics to me. And then you have the other kind of people who like, you know, they'll take those ideas and then develop them further a song. Well, anyway, man, think about that stuff for me. Like I said, we're out next week for Memorial Day, but see if you can use this concept with using the sequences numbers, using what I just talked about with the chord tones with 7 chords, primarily sticking with major 7 and minor 7. The chords I've written out here are in the key of C. These chords are transferable. I'll teach you how to transpose it later on, but this is in the key of C right here. So you're gonna want to use like C major pentatonic and like one of these chords right here. Like, I would highly suggest like E minor 7. D minor would be awesome, would be good. And then A minor 7 would be really good to do. And more about that later on. So, all right, man, have fun with that. I hope to see some really cool ideas come out of your guitar, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.